and that was, next slide, please. Excuse me, 165 fatalities in 2022. It is the worst year on record since the 1980s. And that was prior, I believe, prior to most seatbelt laws. We're just having a really hard time wrapping our heads around why in 2022 people weren't wearing seatbelts, which was cause of some of these fatalities. Why pedestrians insist on crossing where there are no facilities or crosswalks or lights, you know, and then the bicyclists are just getting run over. There, people are not paying attention. So it's so just heartbreaking when you're in transportation and you're responsible for the transportation networks and you see these kinds of things happening. So we just do this at every meeting we're having now to remind you all to please reach out to your friends, your family, make sure they're buckling, make sure they're driving safely, make sure they're not running stop signs and red lights. We do take this very, very personally, and we're doing everything we can. We're meeting now with the Office of Highway Safety, the Delaware State Police, and others across the state to try and get kind of control over what's happening and why. So stay tuned for that. There'll be more coming out in the next few months. And I just, the first fatality, one of the first fatalities this year in 23 was actually a pedestrian. So it's not slowing down. It's again, very heartbreaking. Anyway, I'm going to hand it back over to Andrea so she can continue with the slides.
And just to mention to everyone, I did start recording the meeting. We are doing that, and we have been doing that for the past ones too, and they get published to a webpage that we're keeping up to date. So anyone who doesn't make it or wants to learn more about what's going on can catch up. So again, our agenda today will spend just a little bit of time with a recap for those who are new to these meetings and this process. We will focus in on the public engagement piece and prepping for that public workshop coming up in February. And then we'll have just a few updates, both on the community vision as well as existing conditions, trends, a few updates that we've put together since the last meeting back December 8th, I think it was. And then we'll just recap, make sure we know what we need to do for the next steps and carry on. So we might be a little even out of here a little early today. Okay, so just to remind folks, this is the stakeholder committee for the effort, and these are the roles that we are hoping you continue to play in this process. So participating actively throughout, giving your input both on the existing conditions and concerns, giving us a sense of the broader view from the community as a whole perspective, as well as your individual and kind of organizationally specific views, and offer suggestions, thoughts to DelDOT as well as the towns. And lastly, build community support toward the process and the plan, which is going to be especially important as we aim to get involvement at the public workshop as well as through surveying and even on into implementation. So again, the purpose of this effort, it's really to be a longer range look and planning effort that brings together land use and transportation, looking kind of 20-year time horizon. So we're not talking just about, hey, here's what needs to be fixed on the roads tomorrow or even next year, but let's really talk long range. So it's important for us to emphasize and understand the community's vision, of course. What does the community want itself to be like and look like 10, 20 years out? And oftentimes transportation projects as well as development projects are on those time frames. So that'll be something we continue to focus on and focus on those strategies we can use toward guiding toward achieving those visions into the future. So the products of this effort are likely to be used as the transportation component for both Greenwood and Bridgeville and their comprehensive planning efforts that the state requires. And that's, important to do, to be proactive. And so you see down below here, the third bullet, the issues that kind of fall within the purview of this effort. So it's not a comprehensive plan, it's really focusing in on transportation. And then this is just a process to give you an understanding of the schedule and when things are happening. So we are roughly kind of here, right in the middle of existing conditions and community visioning phase. We have that public workshop coming up, and there will be focus then after we get through the public workshop on developing strategies, the plan itself, and moving forward to sharing that with the public toward the end of spring. So before I jump into the public engagement piece, any questions at this point, especially for folks who are new to this? Just want to be sure I pause every once in a while. Okay, we'll give it the 4-second rule and keep moving. I guess I'll also say, you know, because we have a range of folks here, we might talk a bit in this next part of our conversation about things that are a little more logistical, and thanks for being patient for those of you, you know, that might not have a direct role in kind of coordinating all the details, but this is once a month that we connect, and it is helpful to make sure we're moving along with the logistics as well. So thank you. So like you just saw in the previous slide, in terms of our process, we've got those 2 public workshops as a key component of public engagement. We've got a public survey that we're coming up with that we hope to test with you all in, you know, later this month, early February, so that we can roll that out alongside public workshop number 1. And then we have our monthly stakeholder committee meetings that have been ongoing. And we anticipate having a handful more through the period of, you know, springish, and then thereafter we'll revisit what those should look like. All right, so public workshop number 1. Our objective with that is to take what you all have seen from our previous meetings, kind of take that effort, summarize it, and ask the community, is this accurate? Is this reflecting what you understand are the conditions in the community, are your vision, and understand your priorities? So you'll see hopefully that reflected in the materials that I circulated earlier yesterday, and we'll talk about those, and I can show those on the screen. Right now, I'll talk a few more specifics about the logistics. So the date is the 23rd, and for Heath and Kevin, thanks for helping confirm the location and the date. And I'll continue to be working with the principal on logistics. That event is going to be a drop-in type, open house type event. So 4 to 6 p.m. is the window of time people can show up. We're not expecting people to stay the full 2 hours. We want to make it easy for folks to access, and that tends to be a good way of doing this. So that will be the in-person option. People can come look at some displays of the information, look at the displays that reflect, here's what we've heard about the community's vision, here's what we've come together with and have an understanding of in terms of conditions and trends. Anything that, you know, you feel differently about, does this consistent with your understanding? Give folks in the community the opportunity to ask questions, give us any other feedback. And then concurrent with that, we want to again, make it easily accessible. So we plan to have a pre-recorded presentation that's available online along with the survey. And that I anticipate would be up for a couple of weeks. Does anyone have any suggestions? Does the 2 weeks feel about right? That's kind of a ballpark. That seemed right to me. You don't want to give people too much time because then they think, oh, well, I'll do it later. And if you don't give them enough time, of course, you know, there's that end of the spectrum. Okay, I saw nodding. I'm not hearing from anyone feeling otherwise, so we'll continue with that as our timeline. Feel free to chime in too if you have any questions. So to get a little more specific about what we'll do at the workshop, specifically the in-person component, we'll have areas set up, and this will be in the school cafeteria, where we'll have displays. Some of them will probably be screens. Some of them will be more printed boards. And with these 3 areas, community vision, the existing conditions and trends, and then identification of challenges, opportunities, we'll have a little simple activity so people that show up can be sharing their feedback and not just talk to us, but also kind of write down their thoughts. And it can be on a material that's recorded, and we can have it then to reflect on as we proceed, both as the team, the project team doing this, but also then bring it back to you all, the stakeholder committee, to reflect on as we meet again subsequent to the workshop. So things for the visioning area would be the community visioning draft content that was shared with you, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll have the ability for folks to jot down their thoughts on stickies and have some stickers to help prioritize amongst those issues. Similarly, with existing conditions, have information about these 3 categories or topics. So the demographics, land use development component, the transportation component, those 2 being, essential, directly related elements to transportation plan, and then anything else. So in the past, we've talked about some environmental components as well as economic development. And I would anticipate that's what the rest of the content would focus on. And again, have sticky notes, stickers to help give people that time to reflect their ideas on the information that they're seeing. And then lastly, as you kind of see as examples on these images below, have a table with a map, a large format map, where again, people can kind of look at the community in an aerial view and say, this is an area that I've experienced an issue, here's what it is. And we'll have it there so that we can capture those and find out ways to do our best to incorporate them into the plan. And, if they're not directly related to transportation, they kind of fall outside into another issue. We'll be able to have that kind of documented, and we can do our best to reflect on how it relates to transportation and where it may not, work with the towns to help them incorporate it into their planning work. So again, I'll pause. Any questions, thoughts? I'm good. Okay. All right. So if you have the survey handy, I don't necessarily intend to go through the entire survey document. I'll probably skim over the questions and see if anyone has thoughts. Before I do that, the intent of this is to answer some of these key questions regarding the vision for the community and the principles. Is there anything missing? So by understanding what the community is hoping to be like, hoping to achieve in the future, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, we can then back that up and say, okay, our question for this plan is really, how do we achieve that given the existing conditions that are on the ground today and policies, and what do we need to do to make those things happen? So that is the aim. The survey is also intended to help us hear from the public what the priorities are. So again, check our thinking, check our hearing. Are we moving forward, developing this plan in a way that's consistent with what everyone else is thinking? So checking in, and we want to keep it simple. People are bombarded by notifications, requests to fill out surveys, etc. So we know we have limited attention span, and so that's why you see this being a fairly short, brief, but hopefully, not overwhelming survey that folks will be willing to take. So we'll ask you all for your help in getting it out to the community. It will be online, and we will have it available that way for people to take, as I said, a couple weeks around the actual in-person event. And I'm going to pull over. Can everyone see my new window here that I dragged over? Okay. Pull that over so we can just talk about anything that folks may have come up with.
The only thing I have for question number 1, Andrea, would be to add, while I don't live, work, or go to school in either location, I am a visitor, a frequent visitor, something along those lines. I'm obviously just thinking of myself visiting family there, that kind of stuff, or going there for specific shops or things. So getting more of a visitor's perspective from it as well.
Okay. Appreciated suggestion. Others? I'll keep moving. We can always go back, of course, and even after the fact here, we will be working with Survey Planet to get this loaded up, and we will test out once it's made up electronically. We'll send this out to you all so you can help us test it, make sure access is fine, nobody has trouble getting to it or understanding the questions. So this isn't your last opportunity, but we'd like to clean things up before we take the time to enter them into the web. Okay. This is actually question 2. It looks like the numbering fell off. Sorry about that. So recent community comprehensive plans, and we can footnote what that means because I know not everyone is familiar with that term. Identify community vision of sustainable, vibrant rural communities. Extending from that vision are goals and objectives derived from the existing planning materials and informed by your committee here. So we want people to prioritize these in order of what's important. So again, we kind of, all of us as a committee are hearing, yeah, you know, the community is in agreement, or no, we might have gotten this one not quite right. So these are organized around the themes that you would have seen in the community vision. And that really will be a framework for the plan. That's what part of the intent of doing so is. But theme A being transportation, B being that land use development component, C being economic development, and E being the environment. So this will be a question where people can organize kind of, it'll depend on the survey format options itself, but it'll be some sort of, you know, ranking type, scoring type question. And then just a handful more questions here. Give people the opportunity to add anything that they may not have seen on this list so that they can get more specific should they want to. Give them the opportunity again to prioritize issues as their level of importance to each individual. And again, these follow in line with the discussions that we've been having as a group. So connectivity, multimodal, bicycle and pedestrian accessibility, tourism, and that issue of people having to be routed around town, or do we want them to be going into town? I know these words themselves are not necessarily intuitive, so that's one thing as we go back through, we will want to make sure we're using language that makes sense to the general population. So that's an item. In fact, I'll write it right here just to make sure. So definitions. Connectivity, flooding and stormwater management, dealing with large vehicles and freight navigation through town, farm equipment, roadway safety, public transit. Any immediate reactions? There's this last one. Anything else folks would like to add? Of course, we want to make sure we don't limit anyone if they had something else to share. And then this question 4, while we determined that it doesn't make sense to probably put together a map-based question, especially because that's not an option with the survey platform we're going to use, we'll have a question that allows people to make comments to identify any specific concerns, transportation-related concerns or opportunities that have a location-specific element. So pausing. Thoughts about survey, questions about survey? No? Okay. Well, don't hesitate. We will be working to get this made into an electronic form early next week. So if you can give us feedback, if you think of anything or see anything, that would be appreciated sooner than later. And I will go back now to moving right along with our PowerPoint. So the next thing is just to visit that community vision summary that I shared. We have talked about this at the last meeting, so this shouldn't be super new. the vision summary, you will see these 5 categories, and they really emerged from these documents, the 2 town comprehensive plans that were both completed in the last 5 years or so. And then the master plan for Bridgeville and Greenwood, which is kind of a joint master planning document that was from 2014, but still seemed to resonate for the communities. So that is how we got to these items. And I will pull over. So this is also a document that was attached to my reminder email earlier this week. If you have it handy, you might want to pull it out. And again, this is just reflecting what you just saw on the slides. But did anyone feel, that we've missed anything from these transportation related goals and objectives? The categories, like I mentioned, are in alignment with how we've been organizing our conversations and really shape a framework for the planning effort. And we tried to summarize, but also be specific enough where it wouldn't be overwhelming to people. But this is really what we're going to base that content for the public's engagement on. So we need to make sure if anyone has other thoughts that we get those now so that we can proceed developing materials for February. I'll give everyone just a minute to kind of scan over that. Chime in with anything. You think there's a topic that's not captured in any of these? If you think there's a word that you're like, I don't know what that means, it's good to know. And we will reflect on that too, just to make sure wording will be clear to a more general audience. Okay. With that, I will move us along. Then this next part is to talk a bit more about existing conditions trends. We spoke last month pretty in depth, gave you a full scan of what conditions, transportation related, land use growth related, environment and economic development related, sort of a smorgasbord of all of those issues that have an impact and direct relationship with transportation. So this is not intended to be a repeat of that. If you'd like to see more of that, you can revisit. Just let someone move in, and if you can mute, there's a strong background noise. Thanks. But if you have any more questions about what we've covered in terms of the other categories, you can either reach out or visit the presentation from last month, which is again on the website. If you look at Bridgeville, has the material posted there and readily available. So since last meeting, though, we did meet with the town managers as well as the Office of State Planning, and this was really mainly the focus. I think this summarizes the focus of the conversation. So what you're seeing here is a map of planned growth and annexation areas. That's where the towns have identified, this is where we think we will be growing. And so as we think about transportation, as I said before, both issues have timeframes that require planning and managing and development timelines that can be years long. And so it's important that your plans and where you want to grow are reflected in your mapping and in your plans, so that as development decisions, as infrastructure decisions come through, they're consistent with what the community wants to achieve and wants to be like in the future. So that's the importance of this in the work we're doing. The towns themselves obviously have the responsibility of, and working with the state, have the responsibility of focusing on, where growth and development is going to be allowed, and executing their reviews and site planning and development processes, and land use processes. But for purposes here, you're seeing a map with these background colors, red, orange, yellow, white, and gray, that reflect the state strategies for policies and spending. We had this map last month, but I'll recap it again for those who are new and just in case you forgot what they mean. But that's the state approach that's really been in place for quite a few, multiple decades now, where the state basically is saying, you know, we want to work with the local communities to make sure that the growth areas and places that we're all investing money are consistent so that we're effective in using our money and responsible in using our money and consistent with our policies and so on. So red is designated as those areas that are really great central growth areas. And as you see, red and orange comprise mainly the areas within the town boundaries or just outside. So that's where the most growth, you can think of it as the most growth kind of is desirable. And then working your way out to the white color through yellow and white, those are levels 3 and 4. Those are 3 being in development, anticipated development, 4 really being let's keep that rural, and gray being out of play. And so as you see in a lot of the parcels highlighted in gray, you know, those are really places that have been set aside as protected, whether agricultural easements or other types of protection. So those are not eligible for development. So some of just the high level takeaways, and then as a heads up to Dorothy, Jen, Janet, I'll pause, and if you have any other thoughts that I may have missed, I'll have you chime in. But to summarize the conversation, I think a couple of things. One, you know, the state, with that policy, the state wants to focus growth and spending on shown in red, orange, and yellow, but not so much, you know, they want to be consistent with the infrastructure in areas that are rural. So as developments might come through that maybe are proposed for areas out in the white, really it's the state's objective to encourage and make sure those areas really don't become developed, because the plan is to keep them rural. And so they'll be making decisions in alignment with this policy framework.
Thanks, Andrea. And if I can just interject real quick. So just for clarification purposes, when you have a development that goes into a level 4, that creates a bubble, right? And so even though the state's saying we're not spending money on making any kind of improvements or any kind of infrastructure there, at some point, if there are 500-600 units going in, we are going to have to use taxpayer money to support that. And we're not okay with that, and neither should the towns be. So what we're telling the towns now is, hey, we're going to work with you, encourage you to build your municipality up and grow it so that we can help you with the infrastructure and making sure you have those things in place. And so from now on, my goal is to, if there's a level 4 development coming in, I'm going to prepare the closest municipality and give them the money and support and planning to deal with it. But unfortunately, out there in level 4, we're just not going to spend the funds. So it's going to be they're going to be an island unto themselves if they just choose to go out in the middle of nowhere from this point forward. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think this is a really great time to be working in the planning field. We have a lot of kind of initiatives, technology, and different things going on, and I'm really trying hard to connect all of that with all of our municipalities across Sussex County. So stay tuned. It's really coming together. So exciting times.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, the other part of the conversations with the towns and the Office of State Planning too is this idea back to this, the purple lines that you see here on the periphery of the towns, and the green, those were the annexation areas or the growth areas as defined in the most recent comprehensive plans, which now again are about 5 years old for both towns. And so the discussion went to, you know, there's updates that need to happen typically, and the state requires a review every 5 years and a full update of comprehensive plans every 10. But in discussion, it sounded like with the growth that's been happening as of late and with the development demand that's being seen, as well as some changes like you see here in gray, you know, these areas that are shown within the growth boundaries or annexation areas are actually already preserved. It probably doesn't make sense to have those identified as annexation areas. So point being, the towns both said, we're looking at shifting those around and having discussions about where those boundaries should be reoriented so that they're better aligned, and really do reflect both a realistic, likely future and also a desirable future that aligns with the community vision. So anything that I missed or that Janet or Dorothy or Jen, you wanted to add about that side of things?
The only thing I would, and again, I'm so glad that Heath and Kevin have been able to join us today, because the school districts are such an important component for these municipalities, right? So we were talking with the Coastal Quarters group, and where we had Cape and Indian River feeding in to the conversation. And it's really important that the towns, municipalities stay connected with the districts as development and growth happens. Because we ended up, I hate throwing Milford under the bus, but I live here, so I'm going to do it. Milford Ponds did variances on their roadways, and now they can't get buses. I don't know if a fire truck, I'm sure a fire truck could get in there and just ram through the cars that are parked on the street, but just those kind of things to be aware of, and making sure that there's a lot of communication happening with your municipal partners.
Does anyone else have questions about this or anything that was covered, or anything else that you've thought of? All right. Well, then it looks like we will be able to wrap up this meeting a little early, which I'm sure, at least in your mind, you can applaud. And just a few wrap up points about next steps and what's coming. So the next stakeholder committee meeting, we were intending to have virtual, and it sounded like for most people that works well. I think we'd like to have another in-person before we move too much further beyond the actual public workshop. But for the Thursday, February 9th meeting, 1 p.m., we'll plan to have that. It'll be virtual. Does anyone feel differently, that virtual is not as helpful and want to have an in-person? Virtual good. Kind of what I expected. And for that meeting, we will revisit focusing again on some of the materials for the public workshop and more of the last minute kind of coordination items, some of which you see in this list down below. So talking about things like having your help getting word out to different populations. One thing that came up last meeting that Heath, you might be interested in, is just the thought of, getting some engagement from maybe some of the youth or students who are there coming out of school around the time that we're getting started with this. So they would be welcomed and actually encouraged, because they are the age, where they're going to inherit the future that this is planning for. So it's always great to have young folks.
And along those lines, I'm happy to bring, Delta planning team in anytime to speak to any class if anybody's ever interested. We also, with the Coastal Quarters Initiative, have launched a connection with the ESL classes in the area. So we're going to be going in and making sure that the Hispanic populations in and around our municipalities, Georgetown, I think Bridgeville has some as well, that they're brought up to speed and versed on what's happening, and are able to provide us with their feedback and challenges that they're facing in regards to, getting to and from work, to and from school, to and from places that they need to visit on a regular basis. So very excited that a lot more is kind of going forward with different populations. So Heath, if you ever have anybody that wants a transportation presentation done in their class, I know that sounds crazy, but we're always looking for new people, new kids to want to do, civil engineering and planning and all these, fun things that we get to do on a daily basis. So
super. We will be in the interim, or right around the time we have our next stakeholder meeting, also wanting to have little updates to each of the town leadership. So commission and council in Greenwood and Bridgeville. Janet, since we last talked, February 8th looks good. Jen plans to present for that workshop, or that meeting rather. And
okay.
I will
We'll make sure we put her on the agenda. Will it just be Jen, or should I put you on there
No,
as well? Or?
It'll just be me.
Okay.
Yep,
Jen?
and I'll be there in person. Janet, thank you.
Great, thanks.
And I will present to Bridgeville on the 13th, again, to give updates to the leadership on the commission, the commissioners rather. And then just lastly, a handful of items for anticipation, prepping for the public workshop. So just to recap as we wrap up here. Heath, we're gonna reach out to Kelly and try to set up a time in early February, probably the first week, no later, to visit the school so we can just make sure we have all the details ironed out and know what we will have access to and what the space looks like and all of that. So we'll work on that.
Sounds good.
Super. Survey, we'll be setting that up and you all will be our guinea pigs. We will circulate that, I would say, within the next couple of weeks, by early February-ish. And then just some web updates that we will be working on. The website is nice and current. So again, you can find that, I think if you Google Bridgeville and the transportation plan, that can come up. I'll make sure that I include the hyperlink again in the meeting email that I send around in a couple days with notes and everything. So you all have that, because it would be great to have you to share that with anyone that you think will be interested. A flyer, we'll ask you to help with that, sharing that out once it's ready in early February-ish. And we're going to get one to Bridgeville, who said they can include a newsletter item in their mailing that goes out when they circulate bills at the end of the month or first of the coming month. And lastly, please do share the information as it comes with folks that you know in town. Let us know if you have any questions or others do. And with that,
well, for the workshop, I just wanted to say real quick, we will be doing publication. We usually do the normal within each of the local newspapers. So usually Delaware State News, and then whichever Dover Post gets to the Bridgeville Greenwood area. But we're also going to look to do it with, oh, great, thanks, Heath. We're also going to look to share it on Facebook. So once we get that set up with Dell.Facebook, we will make sure that you all are aware too, so people can go on and link to the information for the public workshop, as well as link to the website to get the information. So stay tuned.
Super. So anyone else, again, last call for questions, thoughts, comments? Jack, looks like you.
I'm good.
Good, okay. I see thumbs up. All right, well, great. Well, everyone can make use of the extra 20 minutes left with, I'm sure, plenty of things to do. And we appreciate, again, your ongoing participation. It's really important to have a broad set of viewpoints involved when you're doing planning like this. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay safe.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
so much.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.